Have you ever tasted the futility of living life under the sun? No matter how hard you try, it seems like nothing works out exactly as you've planned. Well, there's a little boy in a children's book that I read about a number of years ago that's become one of my favorites, and maybe you've heard this story too. His name was Alexander. And the way the story goes, I'm just going to take a few minutes and read it to you. He says, "I went to sleep with gum in my mouth, and now there's gum in my hair. And when I got out of bed this morning, I tripped on the skateboard, and by mistake, I dropped my sweater in the sink while the water was running, and I could tell it was going to be a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. At breakfast, Anthony found a Corvette Stingray car kit in his breakfast cereal box. Nick found a junior undercover agent code ring in his breakfast cereal box. But in my breakfast cereal box, all I found was breakfast cereal. I think I'll move to Australia." In the carpool, Mrs. Gibson let Becky have a seat by the window. Audrey and Elliot got seats by the window. I said I was being scrunched. I said I was being smushed. I said if I don't get a seat by the window, I'm going to be car sick. But no one even answered. I could tell it was going to be a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. At school, Mrs. Dickens liked Paul's picture of the sailboat better than my picture of the invisible castle. At singing time, she said I sang too loud. At counting time, she said I left out 16. Who needs 16? I could tell it was going to be a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. I could tell because Paul said I wasn't his best friend anymore. He said Philip Parker was his best friend and that Albert Moyo was his next best friend and that I was only his third best friend. "Hope you sit on a tack," I said to Paul. "Hope the next time you get a double-decker strawberry ice cream cone, the ice cream part falls off your cone part and lands in Australia." There were 2 cupcakes in Philip Parker's lunch bag, and Albert got a Hershey bar with almonds, and Paul's mother gave him a piece of jelly roll that had little coconut sprinkles on top. Guess whose mother forgot to put in the dessert? It's going to be a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. That's what it was, because after school, my mom took us all to the dentist, and Dr. Fields found a cavity just in me. "Come back next week and I'll fix it," said Dr. Fields. Next week, I said, "I'm going to Australia." On the way downstairs, the elevator door closed on my foot, and while we were waiting for my mom to get the car, Anthony made me fall where it was muddy, and then I started crying because of the mud, and Nick said I was a crybaby. And when I was punching Nick for saying crybaby, my mom came back with the car and scolded me for being muddy and fighting. I'm having a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. I told everybody, no one even answered. So then we went to the shoe store to buy some sneakers. Anthony chose white ones with blue stripes. Nick chose red ones with white stripes. I chose blue ones with red stripes. But the shoe man said, "We're all sold out." They made me buy plain old white ones, but they can't make me wear them. When we picked up my dad at the office, he said I couldn't play with the copying machine, but I forgot. He also said to watch out for the books on his desk, and I was careful as I could, except for my elbow. He said, "Don't fool around with his phone," but I think I called Australia. My dad said, "Please don't pick him up anymore." It was a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. There were lima beans for dinner, and I hate lima beans. There was kissing on TV, and I hate kissing. My bath was too hot. I got soap in my eyes. My marble went down the drain, and I had to wear my railroad train pajamas. I hate my railroad train pajamas. When I went to bed, Nick took the pillow he said I could keep, and the Mickey Mouse nightlight burned out, and I bit my tongue. The cat wants to sleep with Anthony, not with me. It's been a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. My mom says days are like that, even in Australia. You had one of those? Maybe you've had a week of those. Warren Wiersbe, in his commentary on the book of Ecclesiastes, talks about futility, and he gives some expressions about it. He says, sometimes we say things like as futile as watering a post, or as futile as plowing the rocks, or as futile as singing songs to a dead horse, or as futile as carrying water in a sieve. So what do you do when the futility of life smacks you in the face? Well, King Solomon explores this topic with us today in Ecclesiastes chapter 6. So if you have your Bible, turn your Old Testament to the book of Ecclesiastes, and we're going to continue our study in this book. And as Solomon is observing life, he sees things that don't seem to be fair. And he was troubled because life doesn't always make sense. And so in the first 9 verses, he tells us that we need to be on guard against popular prescriptions for happiness. Let me read those verses. It says, "There is a tragedy I have observed under the sun, and it weighs heavily on humanity. God gives a person riches, wealth, and honor, so that he lacks nothing of all he desires for himself, but God does not allow him to enjoy them. Instead, a stranger will enjoy them. This is futile and a sickening tragedy. A man may father 100 children, may live many years. No matter how long he lives, if he is not satisfied by good things and does not even have a proper burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. For he comes in futility, and he goes in darkness, and his name is shrouded in darkness. Though a stillborn child does not see the sun, is not conscious, it has more rest than he. And if a person lives 1,000 years twice, but does not experience happiness, do not both go to the same place? All of a person's labor is for his stomach, yet the appetite is never satisfied. What advantage, then, does the wise person have over the fool? What advantage is there for the poor person who knows how to conduct himself before others? Better what the eyes see than a wandering desire. This too is futile and a pursuit of the wind." He brings up 5 different popular prescriptions for happiness. And then he comments on them and sees why, or explains why, these things don't always work out for us. And the first one he mentions is wealth. And if you were here a couple weeks ago, we went through chapter 5 where he talked about that. And I have each of these broken down into 3 areas. One is the prescription, one is the problem, and then one is the principle. And the prescription regarding wealth in verses 1 and 2 is the idea that if I could just make enough money or buy enough of the comforts and luxuries of life, I'll be happy. I wonder how many of us think this way. My guess is all of us at some time probably figured maybe that might be the answer. That if we can just get out of debt, if we could just make enough money to have some luxuries and comforts, then maybe life would be good. So often what do? We work too much. We never get enough rest. We don't spend enough time with the ones we love. And Solomon tells us in these verses that even if we get what we want, we're not always able to enjoy what we get. Listen to what he says. He says, "Here's a tragedy I observed under the sun, and it weighs heavily on humanity. God gives a person riches, wealth, and honor, so that he lacks nothing of all he desires from himself, but God does not allow him to enjoy them. Instead, a stranger will enjoy them. This is futile and a sickening tragedy." He says, you know what? Even if you get what you hope for, sometimes you don't get to enjoy it. So what causes a person not to be able to enjoy their blessings? Well, I think a lot of things. It could be a war. It could be an actual enemy. It could be a thief. It could be sickness. It could be emotional distress. It could be some kind of natural disaster. There's a lot of things in the world that can separate us from the things that we've been blessed with. And the result often is, at least with our material goods, that someone else benefits from them. The principle is we can never be truly satisfied and fully enjoy the gifts of God without knowing the God who gives the gifts. Until we realize that there is a God who has granted these things to us, we won't be able to fully enjoy them. 1 Timothy 6:17, it says, "Instruct those who are rich in the present age not to be arrogant or to set their hope on the uncertainty of wealth, but on God, who richly provides us with all things to enjoy." So that's the first popular prescription for happiness that he kind of debunks or shoots some holes in it. And then the next one is family. And here the prescription is, if I could just find the right person, settle down and have a family, I'll be happy. Verses 3-5, "A man may father 100 children, may live many years. No matter how long he lives, if he's not satisfied by good things and does not even have a proper burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. For he comes in futility and he goes in darkness, and his name is shrouded in darkness. Though a stillborn child does not see the sun and is not conscious, it has more rest than he. And if a person lives 1,000 years twice but does not experience happiness, do not both go to the same place? Again, in this book, Solomon is looking at things from an earthly perspective. He calls it under the sun. He's just observing life, and he's making some conclusions. So again, the thought is, the plan or the prescription or the hope is, you know what? Maybe it's not in material wealth. Maybe it's in family. Maybe it's in having the right person and having a bunch of kids. Well, the problem is having a spouse and many children do not guarantee a life of happiness or a lack of problems. I think a couple that has problems and struggles and thinks, you know what? What's missing is we need to have kids, and that'll solve our problems. I think they're headed into more problems. Isn't that true? If you have a bad relationship, kids aren't going to fix it. Might get you a little distracted, but they're not going to solve the problems. And he makes a strange comparison here. I read it twice. I read it at the beginning, and then I read it just now, that he compares that with a stillborn baby. In other words, he's saying it's better for the one who is not even born than for the one who's never able to enjoy life. And there's one phrase in there where he talks about it doesn't even have a proper burial. I think it probably refers to the fact that they weren't even worth honoring or being remembered by their family. That when they were gone, everybody was okay with that. They had that kind of a troubled life, that kind of an existence where they couldn't even enjoy their family or what they had. And I think there's an important principle here as well, that we can't be dependent upon human relationships to bring us ultimate happiness or satisfaction. And take note of what I'm saying. I'm not saying that we can't enjoy our family. He's not saying that we can. But we can't be dependent upon them so much that that's our absolute source of happiness. That there has to be something else. I remember when I was studying counseling, it seemed like the particular diagnosis of the day was codependency. Do you remember hearing about codependency? Everybody was codependent. And that's actually what kind of this is talking about, the idea that you can't really have any kind of enjoyment in life apart from this other person. That you're so dependent on them that they determine your happiness. And in a way, that's what Solomon is saying here, that we can't depend completely on just human relationships to make our life happy. When we make our spouse or our children the source of our happiness, they are burdened with a weight they're never meant to bear. You ever feel that? You ever feel that kind of pressure from your spouse or maybe your family that they're dependent on you to make them happy? Well, I don't know about you, but you can't do it. None of us are capable of making anyone else happy. We can do things to bless them. We can do things to encourage them. We can, invest in their lives, but we don't have that power to make them happy. And if that's what we're doing to others, then we're putting on them a burden that they really can't bear, and it's going to affect the relationship. When we expect our family to provide the satisfaction that only God can give, what happens? We become demanding or manipulative or controlling, and that often actually destroys the relationship rather than gaining what we hope to get. A third area is the prescription of long life. And that was already mentioned, where he uses kind of exaggeration, where he talks about in verse 6, if a person lives 1,000 years twice but doesn't experience happiness, do not both go to the same place. The idea here is, to find happiness in life, if I can live to a ripe old age, I would be happy. I don't know about you, but I don't know if I want to live to a real old age. I've seen what that can be like. I think it's great if you can live a long time and be healthy, but to live a long time, just to live a long time, isn't always a blessing. And that's the problem. Long life by itself without enjoyment or satisfaction or happiness is more of a curse than a blessing. I remember when I was a kid, one of the things I liked were monster movies. I don't know if any of you were like that, but I used to watch all the old classic monster movies, Frankenstein and Dracula and the Wolfman. And you know what they all have in common? They all have a theme about living forever, but there's a bad part of that, right? That the vampire or the werewolf or even Frankenstein, it's like this life that goes on, but actually it's a cursed life. And obviously those are fictional, but I think the authors that wrote those stories and wrote those screenplays, they were struggling with this whole thing about living forever. Because is there a dark side of it? And certainly in those stories, there was. Actually, physical death is a gift. It's a gift to fallen man in an evil, corrupted, non-user-friendly universe. You ever wonder about that? Why do people die? Well, one of the reasons is because of the fall, we're separated from God and His plan, and our planet has fallen. There's all kinds of sad things that goes on in our world that we can't control. And so God, rather than making us exist in this kind of a world where there's corruption and evil and disasters and hardship that would go on, He banished Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden and especially from the tree of life so that there would be the hope of a resurrected life in a new world. And so the principle here is that abundant life is not measured by the number of years one lives, but by living in relationship with God, our Creator. Jesus said in John 17:3, "This is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God, and the one you have sent, Jesus Christ." That's life. Life is being connected in relationship with our Heavenly Father, with our God, with the one who designed us and knows what will truly give us fulfillment. I love this quote. Someone once said, "Don't be as concerned about adding years to your life as adding life to your years." I think that's a great thought. Don't be as concerned about adding years to your life as adding life to your years. Are you adding life to your years? Are you living in such a way to experience the fullness of a relationship with God and His good pleasure in your life? Another prescription for happiness that Solomon noticed was work. It says in verse 7, all of a person's labor is for his stomach, yet the appetite is never satisfied. The way I put that one was that prescription for happiness was if I could just find the right job or career or profession where I could use my talents and interests and abilities and make a living wage, I'd be happy. And you know what? I think if you do find the right job or career based on how God's wired you, you're going to be way more satisfied than not. I don't know how many of you have been in dead-end jobs. A few of you? Maybe you shouldn't raise your hand in case your boss is here or something. But you know, we find ourselves sometimes struggling with that. And I think especially in our younger years, we're trying to find our niche. We're trying to figure out where we actually fit in this world and where our little place is. And when you find that, there is a sense of fulfillment. But does it solve all your problems? Not exactly. And that's what he's saying. He said work cannot satisfy our appetites and desires. That work isn't the end all. It isn't the solution to everything. It's better than unemployment, that's for sure. It's better than not working, but it can't be where we put all our eggs. You probably heard that expression, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And that's kind of what he's saying is work isn't the basket that you put all your eggs in. And the principle here is that we were created for a relationship with God and are designed to share in His glory. And our deepest longings can't be fulfilled by lesser things. I came across a story I liked. It said a little girl once asked her father for a stick horse. Week after week she pleaded, "Please, Daddy, can't I have a stick horse? They're not very expensive, and besides, all the other kids have them." Her father was unyielding in his refusal. She thought her father was the meanest, most unreasonable father in the whole wide world. All she could think about was that stick horse. Then one day on his daughter's birthday, the father said, "Sweetheart, I want you to come outside. I have a surprise for you." Her heart leaped as she thought, maybe he's changed his mind and he bought me a stick horse. When she stepped out on the porch, she almost couldn't believe her eyes. There in front of her, tied to the porch rail, was a real live chestnut pony. Her father said, I know how badly you wanted a stick horse, but I was saving to buy you a real pony. I knew that once you had the real thing, you wouldn't care much about a stick horse. He was right, of course. What kind of father would prevent us from having and enjoying the things we have our hearts set on? A father who has something better in store. 1 Corinthians 2:9 says, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has conceived what God has prepared for those who love him. Our deepest longings can't be fulfilled by lesser things. That's why God doesn't allow us to be satisfied with what isn't the best. And then the fifth and last prescription is wisdom. Verse 8 and 9, it says, what advantage then does the wise person have over the fool? What advantage is there for the poor person who knows how to conduct himself before others? Better what the eyes see than wandering desire. This too is futile and a pursuit of the wind. This last prescription is, if I could just gain wisdom through proper education or training or experience, I'd be happy. But the problem here Solomon reveals to us is that in terms of finding satisfaction under the sun, human wisdom really is no advantage. We read about this at the beginning of this study when we were in Ecclesiastes 1. Verse 18 says, for with much wisdom is much sorrow. As knowledge increases, grief increases. I don't know about you, but the more I read and the more I hear about things, the more I watch the news or hear commentators talk about things, most of the time it doesn't make me happier. Have you figured that out? When you read the news, when you're informed, you get more information, you're more educated, does it necessarily make you happier? Not usually. In fact, sometimes it makes you understand more what grief is all about and what sadness there is going on in the world. The principle here is that true satisfaction is found inwardly. It's lived out by being content rather than restlessly searching for happiness out there. 1 Timothy 6:6 has a great thought here. It says, but godliness with contentment is great gain. Godliness with contentment is great gain. And then he concludes this section in verses 10 to 12 telling us we need to be aware of the futility of trying to figure out life. 10 says, whatever exists was given its name long ago, and it is known what mankind is. But he's not able to contend with the one stronger than he. For when there are many words, they increase futility. What is the advantage for mankind? For who knows what is good for anyone in life, in the few days of his futile life that he spends like a shadow? Who can tell anyone what will happen after him under the sun? He's saying that by ourselves, apart from God revealing it to us, we're very limited in being able to see things right and being able to predict what's coming or even be able to make sense of what's going on presently. Verse 10, he tells us that God's determined man's limitations, so there's no point in fighting him. That's the idea there about whatever exists was given its name long ago. In the Bible, when you give something its name, it talks about its character and sometimes its destiny. What he's saying here is God's determined these things already. He's determined our limitations and that we can't always figure it out. And in verse 11, he tells us it's futile to argue with God. He says, when there are many words, they increase futility. What is the advantage for mankind? And then in 12, he tells us, we don't know what's good for us or what the future holds. For who knows what is good for anyone in life, in the few days of his futile life that he spends like a shadow? Who can tell anyone what will happen after him under the sun? There's really only one answer to the futility of life, and I think it begins with what it says in Psalm 46:10, be still and know that I am God. A couple thoughts as I conclude. So I've been reading and studying this book. I think there are some interesting thoughts that we can put into practice. The first one this one's hard, and a lot of people fight against this, is I believe life is rigged against us not to work, so that we'll see our need of God. We can't fill that spiritual void in our lives without God. I think what we do is we try to convince ourselves that, no, that life is great. Life here on earth has all the answers, and it's going to fulfill all our needs. And if we do that, we will have no desire or longing for heaven or eternity. And so God's fixed things. He's worked it out. He's rigged it so it doesn't work. So we can't find satisfaction here. So that we'll look to Him. And when we buy into the lie that there's something out there other than God to give our life meaning, we'll end up frustrated and defeated. As long as we deny the problem, we'll never be open to the solution. And so the book of Ecclesiastes is here, I think, for a great purpose. It helps us see the problem, that life under the sun is empty and futile, that the answers aren't found here. We must look above the sun. Romans 8:28 promises us that God's working out everything for good to those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. I want to pose a question as we close. Is there an area of your life you can't figure it out? That no matter how much you mull it over in your mind, no matter how much you talk to other people, no matter how much you read or hear, you can't figure it out. You don't know why it's going on. And God, through His Word, tells us, will you turn it over to me? Will you trust me to work it out in my time? So what about us? Will we stop looking for that formula to trust in and instead put our faith in the only one who deserves our trust? Will we come to Him and acknowledge we don't know. We can't figure it out. But we trust that He knows. And we trust in Him. Let's bow our heads. Perhaps God's speaking to you through His Word today. Maybe you've become frustrated, or maybe you've come to the end of your rope because all the things that you're looking for to bring you fulfillment and lasting happiness seems to be futile. That's good news. It seems crazy that that's good news, but it is, because that's when we'll see our need for Him. That we'll turn from our restless pursuits and recognize that maybe God is the answer. Maybe the life He's calling me to is a better way. So would you respond to Him in faith today? If you don't know Him personally, would you begin by accepting His offer of a relationship with Him and forgiveness of sin and eternal life through His Son, Jesus Christ? Will you take that step by just saying, God, I receive that. I acknowledge my need. I admit that I've been doing it on my own, and I ask you to forgive me. Thank you for accepting me. Thank you for offering me a whole new life. Lord, thanks so much for your word. Even in the hard parts and in the parts that don't make sense to us, Lord, we know that in the midst of the fog, you're reaching out to us, that you desire for us to be in relationship with you. That's only through your Son, Jesus Christ. We give you thanks. In His name, amen.